Jan Schevers. Very much welcome to our course in architecture theory. I'm Daniel Walser. I'm lecturer and in architecture theory at the University of Applied Science in Chur. And I invited you because we met us already, just discovered 10 years ago. You always had a strong interest into Swiss architecture. You always traveled with your students to Switzerland, and since 10 years we keep up a certain exchange. I was several times in your university. Now I took the opportunity to invite you to my university because I think it's an interesting thing that we are both interested in architecture research, in the architecture production, and to create with architecture not just a formal thing, a result, but even to be relevant for the society. And I think that's an interesting approach. You called your lecture Designing the Process because you're much more interested into the process, what you do, how you create. That's why you're still in together, or you still have an exchange with former students. And I think that's super interesting because it talks about what architecture can be. It's not just the object you create. It's not the final result. It's the process you go through. It's the process to create something, but it is well the object which has its own life afterwards, which is out of our hands, but which opens possibilities for society. And I think it's great to have you here. It's great that we get a link into your work because you have your own architecture office. Open Architecture Office, OAO, where you involve as well students, ex-students, former students, and you're teaching as well at TU Eindhoven, which is a continuous exchange between praxis and theory and designing and thinking. And I think that's a great possibility if you can do this. Thank you very much that you're here, and I hand over to you. I think that's we're very curious what you have to talk.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm also very glad that I can sort of return the favor because of all the times that you've helped me out with my numerous visits with students, mainly to Zurich and Flims and Chur. So yeah, happy to do this. Let's see. Well, I'm just going to share my screen. So just let me know if there are any issues with the technology behind it, and just interrupt me. Also feel free, if there are any questions from the people watching the lecture, or if there is anything going on in the chat. I think there's also this option to do that as well.
Yes.
Let me know, either you, Daniel, or someone else, just shout out, and feel free to interrupt me. Yeah. So yeah, as you're saying, first of all, my name is Jan Schevers, and I'll be discussing mostly about the process of designing architecture, mainly from my own experience. And the experience I have is mainly focused on, my own office, which is called Open Architecture Office, or OAO short. But this is definitely not the only thing that I do. So as you already mentioned, I also teach at the Eindhoven University of Technology. And for me, these two kind of realms of architecture are very strongly linked. This is also something in the background of these two first slides that you see, is a sort of object that I made some time ago, which is actually depicting, well, a lot of sort of architectural baggage that I take along with me. And this is something where I find both my work at the university and my work as a practicing architect kind of all come together. So my work at university really allows me to keep sort of digging into the work of other architects and reflecting on, hey, what does that mean for me as an architect? How do I kind of structure my design thinking? But also, where do I take my inspiration from? And this was one of the things that I tried to capture with this object that you see here and a little booklet to go along with it. Was actually by invitation of the Architecture Museum in Frankfurt, the Deutsches Architekturmuseum. And they got together this group of relatively young architects from Flanders, so from northern part of Belgium, and then from the Netherlands, and kind of all grouped them together under the name of the Weaving Generation, I think it was called. And that's also, I saw that also in your introduction that you put online, actually a sort of group that I feel quite comfortable with. Indeed, these kinds of architects that take inspiration from location, but also from others. And that's what this kind of object is trying to do, is taking fragments of other buildings that I kind of take along with me, of architects that look over my shoulder when I'm designing my own buildings, and that inspire me, you know. So, for instance, here you can see on the left an image or a fragment of a medieval monastery in the south of France, Le Toronnet, which for me is probably one of the most inspiring buildings that I've ever been to. But this is combined with, for instance, also one of the columns by Rudolf Olgiati or Peter Merkli, to name but a few Swiss. And then expanding on that, this is also one of the things that I love about working together with students so much. So this is one of the, I think this is actually the project that we met over. So Daniel and me, which was a seminar project, a research project into the work of Rudolf Olgiati, where for me a whole world of inspiration actually opened up. Being an architect that, you know, you in Switzerland, of course, all of you know him. In Holland, it's quite different from that. I think for all of my students, it was really the first time that they encountered the work of Rudolf Olgiati. Everyone knowing Valerio Olgiati, but then this was something different. Just showing a bit of the work that I'm doing as a quick introduction at the university. This is one of the core kind of courses that I teach, which is called architectural engineering. And for that, students are actually asked to make a full-scale detail of a fragment of a building, such as this, where they redesign that building in a completely circular way. So everything is completely demountable, reusable, rethinking every bit of detail, and then in the end also making it at a full scale. And for me, these are always really nice kind of experiments. Also seeing the ingenuity actually of the students, taking it every year sort of a step further. This also even led to a giant kind of material bank that we now have at the university, where students can recycle materials from last year because everything is demountable and reusable. Always a really nice, challenging kind of course each year. Completely different project. This is actually a graduation studio that has been this ongoing studio where students would come in each quarter, and then other students, after a year would graduate. So they would also be sort of apprentices or master apprentices to each other. That's also why this was called the masterly apprentice, where we asked students to take one building by a master architect. And so, for instance, the middle one is by a Flemish firm, De Wilde Vinktailleux. And take everything that they can get out of that one building and then apply it in their own design. So kind of internalize it, make it their own, and put it to work in their own design. And the first step of researching these buildings was to make a model out of it by recreating an existing photograph. So in the bottom, you see these three photographs. These are all the existing photographs of the actual building, and then the top ones are models made by the students. These models, they look horrible from the outside, but from the inside, from that one perspective, everything kind of falls into place. And then they recreate the light and really think about also the materials, recreating all of the materials. And in the process of making these models, they get to know, or really learn everything about that one building, and make it their own. So this is also something that I try to do myself. This is the bookcase that I have here in my office, which is actually also very conveniently located in my home. So everything kind of falls together. Also, my home and / office is like a 5-minute bike ride, very Dutch, from university. So everything is very closely linked together, and that's also the way I like it. So all of my inspiration is at arm's reach. Then, the sort of issue of inspiration is also something that I get from something that we've been doing a couple of weeks ago when I was last time in Zurich, visiting you as well, Danielle. But one of the things that I love to do is doing these kinds of interviews with architects that I find personally very inspiring. One of the first ones that I got to talk to was Peter Merkley here on the top right. And it's really doing these kinds of interviews that spark just a lot of inspiration in my work as well, and really get me thinking and open up new possibilities. And so I love doing these kinds of interviews as well. So the left two are going to be online soon. So I put all of these things on YouTube, and they were actually done by a couple of students of mine, seminar students. I'll show something of that later as well. And then the nice thing about this combination of having university on one side and then my practice on the other side is, first of all, that I think by being actively involved in practice, I can be quite sort of relevant also for students in teaching them the design methods and helping them with the projects. But also on the other way around. So it really keeps me sort of developing myself, but also keeps me very on my toes, so to say. And sometimes also the roles are turned around. So for instance, there are a couple of students who have started their own firm within my firm. That's one of the reasons also I called it Open Architecture Office. So for instance, these three, all of them did projects within my firm, and Niels, the one on the left, even did a project where I was saying like, okay, do that within my office, but he did it all on its own. It kind of sparked really the start of their own office, which they called Werkstatt. And now Niels and Raoul and Floor, they have really like this thriving office, just won a very important also Dutch prize for young architects. And now sometimes I find sort of the roles changing. They are just hugely interested in ecological building, and so looking at sustainability also in a very refreshing kind of low-tech way, which I find really inspiring. And I know for one of the projects that I recently did, made completely out of CLT, I went to them for for inspiration and for really knowing more about the technical aspects also of the material use. So I think that's really nice that there's this kind of network forming of these younger former students, and we can cooperate and do stuff together. It's I find it really nice. So one of the things, for instance, that you see a Floor on the right, and she's really like a master of model making, and this is something that also found its way through her into my own office, where I'm constantly kind of switching between making physical models and then also drawing everything digitally and in BIM, but also visualizing everything in real time. And that's something that I actually want to get into or discuss that in this lecture. How does that work within my office? In my office, I mainly have, well, there's all sorts of clients that I work for, but in this presentation, I actually mainly want to discuss the private clients that I'm working for, because these projects are, on the one hand, they're very tangible and graspable, much less complex than the bigger programs where you have all kinds of municipality and people living around it. And this is much more personal. That's why I actually like working for private clients also so much. But it's also very diverse, and the process is always very unpredictable, so to say. They will change their minds, and it's a very, you also need to get to know your clients a lot, and that's what I like about that. So most of the times I really want to sort of first get to know the client before we start designing. And that's also something that I often, if people come here, there are sometimes people looking for an architect and then saying, yeah, but we have to be in our house before Christmas, then everything needs to be done. And I'm always saying, like, I don't care which Christmas you're talking about, whether it's the next one or in 3 years. That's not what I'm going to do. We need to get to know each other. Of course, there is a bit of a time span, but we also need to take time for it. And one of the things that I always do to get to know each other is to put something there. And so, for instance, this one was for a project in Amsterdam for a private house, where we made this kind of conceptual model, where the people coming to us were saying, like, we want this very spatial kind of organization in our house. We want to be able to look from our living room into the kitchen, and maybe also to another floor, and see people there. And that's really what it should be. And so we made this kind of IKEA cupboard or something, and just gave it to them as homework, saying, like, okay, take this model and put your bedroom where you want it, and put your living room where you want it, on which level. And they started playing around with it, and that really also got us the assignment, actually, or the client. And from this, we started thinking about the structure and how to make it, and then eventually start building it. Now it looks something like this, where it was mainly everything had to do with the spatial arrangement from the inside. So the outside was actually not important for the client. And also, I'm terrible at designing facades for some reason. I always like to just think about the inside and what do you need there. And that's also how, for instance, this giant round window looking over the Markermeer, where you can see like storms approaching the building over water. Really nice. Now, if this was just a very quick introduction of a house, but here it seems, if we talk about the design process, it actually seems as though it's like going from a conceptual image or a sketch, to a model, to a 3D model, and then to an actual building. For me, it's never like that. It may be like that now, if I reflect back on that project that I just showed in Amsterdam, where it seems to be like, okay, that's one step after the other, and they seem to be very coherent and all have to do something with each other. The actual practice of working in my own firm is completely different from that. And what I want to do now is to give you a sort of uncensored look into how such a project or design process works for also a private house, in this case in Veldhoven, here. And so the thing that I'm going to do right now is something that I actually always tell my students not to do. So I'm just going to tell in a sort of chronological order how the design came to be. So it is really going to be a story of, and then this, and then that. That's always something that I try to get my students to move away from, by just really arguing their project. In this case, I'm just going to open it up and see where it takes us. So for basically all of my projects, the first start is really to get to know my location. So where are we building? In this case, as I said, like it's in Veldhoven, it's quite close to where I live in Eindhoven. And it's like somewhere between a village and a city. It's, yeah, you could call it a town, a mid-sized town. And in this case, it's in the old center of it, so right next to the church, which is here. And it's this white plot that you see there, which is like this very long, stretchy plot. Now completely vacant. You can see it here, with some very, yeah, you can argue about the architectural quality, but this is what we find in Holland a lot. So that's also one of the reasons why I love coming to Switzerland so much. There's less mediocrity in the built environment, it seems. But this is what we have to deal with as architects also here in the Netherlands. So it's first getting to know the location, going there, just being there, seeing if you can make sense of it. On the other hand, it's also getting to know my client. And in this case, the client owns this huge greenhouse complex, also in Veldhoven. This is their current house over here. And this is the greenhouse that they use to grow cucumbers in. So this is that from the inside. And the fun thing about this is that once I started talking to my client here and going to the greenhouse and then hearing everything about it, I also become completely excited about what cucumbers are. It's so nice to see someone talk about really his passion. So that kind of also found its way into the project. You'll see later. So it's getting to know the client, but also getting to know the program. What should be in the house. I always kind of carry around these typical building blocks of a program of a house. How big is a living room and bedroom, and how big is a sort of kitchen where you can also have your dining room in it. And this is a 3D version of just building blocks and putting together the first kind of idea of a house. Always very beneficial for talking to clients like this, because most clients cannot read a floor plan or let alone a section, but for some reason, building with blocks is something that they feel very comfortable with and that comes very intuitively. So it's getting to know the program, but also the rules. So all the rules and regulations that have to do with that location. So in Holland, we have this, called it bestemmingsplan. So it's like really all the rules and regulations having to do with that specific location, building height, the form of the roof and things like that. So, and I try to summarize all of these rules in these kinds of drawings. Like, okay, in this location, it needed to have that kind of pitched roof with a certain angle and a certain height of the eaves and the height of the top of the building. And then by playing around with these kinds of rules and with the program, I start making the first kind of sketches. So, and in this case, sketches really also mean 3D sketches. So really like playing around with foam models, sometimes also with gypsum, sometimes with other materials. But foam for me is just very easy. You can cut it very easily, and it looks quite nice immediately. And it's really like trying stuff out in 3D. And in this case, you can even see that with those kinds of weird roof shapes that the city was allowing us to do, we started making this composition of different houses and putting it all under one roof. But you can immediately also see that it comes really from the playing around with that foam board model. That then is translated into a 3D model, seeing what the potential of it is like spatially, and also to be able to look inside and see how the light falls in and things like that. And for me, that was also the moment when, after our first kind of talks that we had, or that I had with the client, this was the first time that I started presenting them with something of a design. And the nice thing about private clients is also that they're very direct, and kind of based on their gut feeling or intuition. That's also something that I stimulate. In this case, though, this was their first reaction. So they said, no, Jan, this is really, we cannot see ourselves living in it. And you don't even know why, but in this case, the response was not good. Then after that first meeting or first design meeting, something interesting happened to the location, because actually you can see here a little roof sticking over the hedge over there. There was an old man living there in that house, and he died of old age. And this was actually a really good thing for the project, bad thing for him and his family, of course, but for the project, it was good, because that meant that where we first had this plot that we could build on, which was really hard to build on, because you can see here like the north arrow in Holland, and as it is also in Switzerland, I'm sure, it's quite important to make the most use of the sun coming from the south, right? So we don't have that much sun here, so I always welcome sun into my designs as much as I can. In this case, it was such a elongated kind of plot that it was really hard to get this kind of connection, first of all to the south, but also to the garden. When this plot became available, so it was a really deep plot, gave us the opportunity. Well, luckily also the client, they were fortunate enough to be able to buy that piece of or that house, and then we were able to cut it off, and they're going to resell this or redevelop it. I'm not sure yet. They don't have a plan for it yet, but we could turn our plot into twice the width, and that gave a lot of other opportunities. So they did that. immediately tore away all of the fences and greenery. And it also opened up the plot in a different way, in approaching the building. So basically, I could start over again, with the entire design process, which wasn't a bad thing because, well, we weren't agreeing, or we hadn't found the sort of right approach to the design anyway. They weren't happy with it. So I started just sketching, seeing what you could do with the new kind of plot that was given, maybe with multiple houses. I think I was still kind of stuck in that idea of with the pitched angle of the roof and having these kinds of multiple blocks coming together now in a completely different way. So I kind of tossed that aside at a certain moment, saying like, okay, but maybe it should be something completely different, something like this, which also follows all of the strict rules from and regulations from the city, like mainly the low gutter height was really a thing that kind of bothered a proper design. Then also sketching in floor plans, but especially in sections, is something that I always love to do, just exploring the spatiality of it. And also these renders, seeing like, okay, what can we do with the quality of the interior, and then what is the relation from the inside to the outside. Also working with references, this kind of reminded me of a project that you'll probably also are well aware of, which I found really nice to strive for, something like this. Again, going back to the clients, seeing how they would respond to this. And no, unfortunately, this was really not up their alley. And they were like, no. Still nothing to go on. But the nice thing of this is that it gave us, at least now I know what they're not looking for, and for me, it also didn't fall into place yet. So it gave us kind of like this dot on the horizon or something. What are we looking for together here? This also coincided with my holiday. That was really up until the moment that I was working on it, just before going on a holiday. And then they said, no, let's not do this. And I thought, okay, then let's take a holiday, let's take a break and start afresh. And one of the things that I always like to do while I'm on a holiday is to make these kinds of sketches. So I everywhere I go, I start drawing what I see, and it really helps me to look in a different way at stuff around me. But it also opens up my mind, I think. So in this case, I also took along my sketchbook, and sometimes to the dismay of my wife and daughter, I'm always kind of working. Well, not always. I also have a lot of fun, but also, working for me is also a lot of fun. So sometimes it's really hard to let go of these kinds of, especially when I'm in this kind of zone of, getting my thoughts on paper. And so I produce like a ton of these sketches while I'm drinking wine in the south of France, in this case. And now looking back at these sketches, I can see something happening there also, where, for instance, like with these ones, there was something very personal to the client coming into the project, which was, and you can recognize it here quite literally, like these greenhouses. So I figured, like, let's take really the passion of the client and make it into the heart of the building, place the greenhouse really at the heart of the building. And that was something that worked really well in terms of floor plan, where you can see like a greenhouse here, kind of organizing the entire floor plan around it. But also it started to do something for, and then here on the right is the existing building that was next door. This could be something of the arrangement of the new building. a little worked out in a bit of a different way, where the silver part would then be the greenhouse. And this was actually the model that I then took to the client. And by now I was getting really nervous. Like I was thinking like, okay, but this is now becoming something that I feel quite, quite good about. And that I have a feeling that we're somewhere now. And so I was really nervous to show that to the client. And their response was just, yeah, that was spot on. They were really like, now you've found really what we're looking for. They didn't even have a clue what they were actually looking for, but for some reason it all kind of fell into place, essentially. So that meant for me to start working on these kinds of models to check, okay, what kind of building is it then going to be? Also to check whether what that's going to do for the interior. And this was something that I was also not completely happy with. So I tried to also remain very critical, even if at a certain point you think, now finally we have like a way to go, or a kind of conceptual approach or something. Then still I try to be very critical of, hey, what am I doing, and is this really working? So in this case, the spatial quality of this is the kitchen / dining room. That wasn't falling into place, where I thought that, and then I start experimenting with it. What does that space do? What should the roof do? How do I want the light to come in? And that's where also these kinds of 3D models help me out a lot. Also to check, what does it do towards the garden? In this case, opening up the building. This is also something that the client wanted very much, like this in-between space, where they could sit outside also long evenings in the summer or late summer or even autumn. They loved sitting there with a group of friends and watching Tour de France. That was really like a sort of dream that they had, sitting on their porch over there and watching guys running their bikes down big mountains. Then seeing how that would work with communicating to the front, and then with that greenhouse in the middle where also the entrance is going to be made. And this is really where, again, everything started to fall into place. So I start making these kinds of drawings, or actually these drawings, because I work, besides working with these physical models, everything is really what you see is the 3D model. In my case, I use Architektur for that. So all of the drawings that I'm going to show of this are also just versions of that 3D model. So this is a horizontal cut at an early stage. So now all of the lines or the walls are just made solid black. But gradually, as the project starts to evolve, I also start filling in gaps in the drawing and giving more detail to it. This also goes for the design. Start thinking about, okay, how does that walking bridge through the greenhouse, how does that work, and where does the balustrade attach to it? Also checking the spatial quality. So they wanted the sort of home office to also be closely sort of have some kind of interaction also with their living, or mainly like the dining room, which was something where mainly the lady of the house is always in the dining room, also doing her work there. That's always the favorite space of her in the house, and then his is really mainly his own office. And they also wanted to be in contact with each other. Then thinking at this point, and this is something that I always try to do right from the beginning of a project, start thinking about the materiality, where in this case it was Also, I think because of personal preference, I guess from the clients, but also something which seemed to be fitting in terms of not trying to kind of do the same thing as the neighbors with the brownish, almost purple brick. I really don't like that kind of brickwork, and in this case, there are many more nice bricks, but it would really conflict with the ones in the surroundings. In this case, stucco seemed to be well, a preferable option. And of course, then thinking back to the research that we did with students about Rudolf Olgiati, you start thinking, okay, what's so nice and interesting about this one? I know that also here he had problems with copings on top of the stucco walls, which gave him headaches, but also the occupants headaches if they didn't have them, and the plaster would go. So these are really also details that I try to keep in mind while at the same time be very practical about it. And start refining the 3D model a bit more, also to convince the people from the city. We have something called welstand in Holland, which is well, the sort of, it's not, yeah, the beauty commission of the city. So they have to approve like that. This really fits into the surroundings, and we like it. So I make these kinds of images to kind of convince them of yeah, how the building is going to communicate to the outside. And these kinds of drawings, also for the building permit, with this kind of level of detail now in the floor plans. And I love making also all of my drawings myself. So this is really where I control each part of the design, right? So down to the, in this case, 1:5 scale details. That's where I think, already, like, this is still quite an early stage of the project, but by really thinking through these kinds of details, I think you can kind of make or break your project. So I like to also be very much in control there. Then once again, linking it back to a render of the back facade to get a bit of a feel for the atmosphere. And in this case, the city approved immediately, and we started working with the contractor to determine the price and stuff, which for Dutch sort of, well, or at least for the clients that I'm used to, was quite a high budget. Also quite some cubic meters here. I think for Swiss, yeah, to put it in a bit of a perspective, building in Switzerland is just, yeah, the budgets that you guys are used to is something that we Dutch architects can only dream of. Of course, not everything is about making expensive buildings. The most cheap buildings sometimes are the most beautiful ones, but it can make your life a bit more easy sometimes as an architect. In this case, or in all of my projects, it's always about finding a balance between what can we spend in terms of money, what can we get from it, and always kind of discussing with the contractor. Here, I also took it upon myself to basically do all the details of everything around the house. So here I show a couple of these drawings. These are all, in this case, made at a scale of 1:20, these drawings, but if you zoom in on them, each of them have really like the 1:5 scale info on them. But of all of the window frames, because all of these details were so important and so much was going wrong with the supplier of these window frames, if I had a look at their first initial drawings, that I thought I would have to make all of these drawings myself. And it actually allowed me to really control everything within that project. And then the kind of, for me, most miraculous thing happens, and that's when the entire thing starts to become a reality. So starting to lay the foundations and And in this case, it was a bit of a more traditional way of building with limestone bricks and concrete floors and big sliding doors, kind of creating this feel between the kitchen, dining room, and the outdoor terrace, which is then covered by this louver system, which you can open and close. And but for me, it's always such a joy to walk around the construction site and then really seeing the kind of ideas become a reality. So in this case, I also took a lot of students to the construction site. For a lot of them, it was the first time that they actually set foot on a construction site. So most of them were second-year students. And it was a real eye-opener, actually, indeed. Now, this is a project that's still going on, the construction, which I think is also one of the, for me, most interesting parts of the construction process, or of the entire process, you know, seeing really the construction. In this case, also while we were working on this, the client was actually thinking of developing also a bigger project around the greenhouse. And this is something that we're working on right now as well, also because they were quite happy with what we were doing together on their house. And I think this is going to be a really exciting one where the greenhouse is also going to supply energy for the housing around it. So we're working on that right now, with some interior images as well. And Daniel, I see that I've already been talking for like 42 minutes. Would it maybe be a good idea to now have a quick break, like a 5-minute break? I also need one to kind of refresh my mouth. And then I have, I think, maybe half an hour more or something where I want to show some other stuff. Is that okay?
Definitely, if you need some water in the break, it's definitely possible to stop for a second. Yes.
Oh, wait. All right. So actually, this the reason why I'm also showing this project that just to refresh, like this project of the greenhouses with the housing around it, that actually really developed around this model. This is a 1 to 500 scale model of the complex, and this was really like a pivotal point or kind of instrument within the entire process of getting the city, the people from the city involved. So first of all, it really worked with together with the client, who by now I knew quite personally, to start defining the sort of setup of the project, but especially with getting all of the people from the urban planning department, the beauty commission, the traffic, the people from financing, all of those people. There was a team of like 8 or 10 people involved. And what I did here was just take that model along and a blank piece of big sketch paper, and as if I was drawing the plan there just off the top of my head or together with them. Of course, I had rehearsed it before, and discussing also with the client what we needed to take with us with that project, and what the most important aspects were. In this case, it was really about involving everyone from the city to get them behind this plan. And while we were making this and also incorporating their comments just by placing arrows and text next to it, then with one session together with these people from the city, we came to the final plan. Normally it would take like at least a year of then talking to that one, then talking to that one, and then having them agree on everything, you know. And in this case, it was just one meeting, and they said, "Yeah, this is a great plan. Go ahead." And then in the end, everyone just made a picture of it. So this is someone from Green and from the Beauty Commission, just taking a photograph of it, saying like, okay, this is what we agree on. Yeah, everyone agrees. Yes, let's do it. Let's make this. And it can be that simple. And this is also, I now have a bit of an intermezzo, which is a secret kind of collection that I have of photos of people that I work for taking photos from the models that I make. And in this kind of collection, you can see how important it is to use a physical model like this in communicating it to the client and sort of getting them involved really into the process and making a connection with them. And so this is something that I think none of them know that I actually do. So try and keep it a secret. But I really love seeing, you know, how clients then interact with it and how things can then fall into place. This is also something, and now I come to another project which I briefly want to show, which I actively use in my kind of communication also with clients, that I quite recently sort of got to have more of a sort of grip on, which is something that I want to discuss right now. So it's really about how to create also alternatives and think in alternatives while discussing the project with my clients. In this case, the project that I want to show you is, it kind of starts with this. It's for a private client, a house also, but now in Zeist, which is more in the center of the Netherlands, quite close to Utrecht. And really nice location, really on a sort of a remote area outside of Zeist, where there's an apple orchard around it. And actually, I already know the location quite well because a couple of 100 meters away from this location, I already recently built a house for other people. And then these ones, they came to me just because they loved that house so much. And that was friends of theirs. And they said, okay, now we want you to design our house as well. Just to briefly show you the house that sort of got it started with them. The start of that house, so the original one, a couple of 100 meters along the road, really started with thinking about the materials. And this is actually where, you know, that I just mentioned Werkstad, the young office also here in Eindhoven, former students of mine, where I really got to sort of make use of their expertise with building with CLT, which you can see a sample of here, but also thinking about really other kind of sustainable, eco-friendly materials like wood fiber insulation over here, or the cladding of the facade. In this case, it's a Douglas wood, timber cladding, but then treated with a sort of fungus that makes it black. And it's a living fungus, so you have to feed it line oil once every 5 years. So the client needs to just put line oil on the facade, and that keeps the fungus alive, and that makes sure that nothing else gets into the wood that's harmful. This is a harmless one, and it also gives it this really nice kind of black look. And we also use this Arcoya wood for some of the timber elements as well. And really starting with that kind of material palette in mind, and again with rules and regulations of the location, that's really where this house, or really the shape of the house, but also which really determined like the presence of it. And these are some of the early study models of it, also exploring what does it mean to have this kind of wood all around you. You know, in Holland, we're definitely not used to building in wood. It's all brick and concrete a bit, but never the way that you see it in Switzerland. Not that high quality, but certainly not this kind of sort of being enveloped in wood. So that was also something that I wanted to test with this model, whether the client was really aware of that, and also to kind of get to know the rules of building with such a material. And it is really like almost like building a model, but then on a bigger scale. Then also here, moving to 3D to test, like also again the kind of material qualities, but also more in detail the expressions of the facade. And in this case, the entire thing was produced in Austria, prefabricated these CLT elements, and then put together by these three. And so Martin is the guy normally working in the office of the contractor, but he was so excited that about the house. He was saying like, oh, for just this once, I'm going to be on the construction site the entire time that they're putting together the CLT. And then Kees and Jack, they were the carpenters there. But yeah, as you can see here below, I also call them like mathematicians and heroes, because they really made the project the way that it is. And I always love just also discussing my project on the construction site with these people making it, because they know so much more about it than I can ever know. And I always try to learn from them a lot and work with them to solve any issues that we're still running into. And yeah, really nice. And then this is something of how it looked from the inside during also construction. In the end, also the all of the CLT remains visible. So this is also something that you then have to think very carefully about in terms of mainly, you know, the installation and things like that. This is also still during construction, so nothing finished yet. But, you know, in this case, the client is really, really happy with it living there, and apparently also some other people, who now then approached me to say like, okay, we have this plot, as we said, a couple of 100 meters down the road. There is an old barn, we can demolish everything, but yeah, we're kind of intrigued by this old barn, they said. The rest is all going to go, and we want our new house there. And as you can see here behind the barn, you can see the apple orchard that's around it. So in this case, I also started with just getting to know the context, right? Getting to know what we could do there and what the plot is. So I started making this kind of model at a scale of 1 to 200 of first the barn and then the plot where we could build, and then trying to get the massing in there. And in this case, already taking the client along with this kind of model with a couple of different options, where we would say, okay, we have the possibility to build such a volume with the rules that the city is imposing on us, or something like this. And we have maybe the possibility to also link the program of the house together with that of the barn. You know, you could imagine that in that barn, you could also make something of a working space, or sort of extension to your living space. Or you could just demolish it, but that's something that we can always do. In this case, the more I got to be involved in the project, the more I got to also appreciate and actually love that old barn. And then thinking about how could we connect maybe the two, or maybe completely disconnected, or and then maybe say, you know, we built something next to our house, or like an annex to it. And discussing all of this with the client actually really worked to really show them a couple of options, take them along in the story that what I was seeing here, to also show them, in this case, really like two completely separate options for the design spatially, testing whether they would feel comfortable in a house where it would have multiple levels, and where something a bit more similar to the project in Amsterdam that I started with, where you could look from the living room into the kitchen and back, and then maybe into the bedrooms or something. Whether that would be something that they would feel comfortable with, or whether they would want it all more on one level, so to say, or something like this. And actually seeing this really opened up a lot of, or opened their eyes in a certain way. And they were actually really happy with both of the options. And they said, yeah, can you not kind of combine them, just push them into each other? And that's something that I literally did at that point. I just said, okay, let's see if we can just merge these two projects into each other and see what then happens. And actually, at first I thought, yeah, that's going to work. But then again, looking critically at what came out of that, spatially, it really didn't. There was something wrong with this space, where I was thinking like, oh, but it's now getting too crowded and too dark, and things are really colliding or clashing, Where at first I thought, oh yeah, this is nice with this kind of triangular extension that worked, but all of a sudden it didn't anymore. And that's really where I found also the kind of limitations of working in a 3D model like this in the sketch phase. So sometimes it's really good to then kind of open your mind in a different way. So I just tossed everything aside, or at least I started just making this into a model, and then seeing, where is this kind of intuition coming from that it's not working yet, and trying to figure that out. And it really had to do with that sort of, yeah, trying to do too much into one project because of the merging of these two different options. And that's where I also started thinking about maybe taking another step back and really start thinking, whenever I start thinking, I start sketching. That's something that kind of comes automatically, or that's so intertwined with me. Whenever I start talking to a student of mine, I need a piece of sketch paper or note block and a pen. And this is also something that I always try to encourage with students as well, but it's really hard. Sometimes there is like this kind of shame or something to start drawing, and I'm not inhibited by that, I think. So for me, these kinds of sketches sometimes also bring about unforeseen ideas. So in this case, I had this old barn that's now hiding behind some bushes here. It had this really nice kind of rounded off curve there, which I thought, is that something that I can use to also link my new building with, in a kind of contemporary way, in an old, or in a sort of own fashion, kind of linking it also in that way to the surroundings. And that's something where after the sketches started really messing around with the foam model again, and this came out of it, kind of flipping that edge around. And actually here a lot of stuff fell into place, because this also helped me to commit to the rules that the city was posing here. They were saying like, okay, you can build here, but the edge of this gutter needs to be, I think, at 4.5 meters, where ideally you would want it to be at 6 meters, to be able to really make like a first floor completely. But by making a sort of cantilevering roof like this, the actual gutter is now at 6 meters. So this made it much more easy to organize the entire program in there. And then still you know, from the first option, the multiple levels really found its way into the project as well, which was also something that at a certain point I couldn't wrap my head around it anymore. You know, and that's also why I needed this model to see how do all of these stories link together. And that's then when I also started returning back to the 3D model and start making these kinds of images, really to explore, hey, what's going on now with interaction to the street in this case. What happens if you have this kind of raised bit of the garden where your living room looks over that, or a lowered piece of the garden where the kitchen and the dining room open up into, and that then creates also these views to the old barn, which at a certain point we also started cutting up. Or how does it then present itself towards the street, in terms of windows also, or in terms of privacy. There's a bathroom behind this kind of very small patio that you can see here. And as I said, cutting up the existing barn like a Gordon Matta Clark kind of sort of insertion into the building, seeing how you would move around and be in that sort of lowered. So this is 1.5 meters lower than ground level, and then connecting it to the kitchen like this. And of course, that, you know, the weird shape beneath the cantilever roof, that also opens up possibilities for making windows like this. Again, I think this is quite a literal reference for me, at least, to Udo Volgiati, kind of Trichterfenster things, you know, also something that I definitely learned there. But also it allows other ways of letting the light in, you know, by taking that curve and then putting a skylight on top of it. So this is then the living room on half level above, where it's almost like this picture frame framing a piece of that barn over there, which is actually a window. And then, you know, the sort of spatial character inside is something that I'm now exploring and seeing, like, okay, does this work now? So when I showed this to the clients, they were immediately like kind of falling in love with the design. So they were really happy with it. And at the same time, they were also, for instance, one of the things that I'm working on right now, making sketches like this today, is also to get this kind of warm atmosphere in there as well. So they were one of the things that I'm now seeing that also these kinds of 3D models do is they allow my clients to be very familiar with what's going on in the project. So they know just as much about the project as I do, where before it would sometimes be like they would only see it once it was built, that they would know, this is what you meant with all of those drawings, you know. And now I can just send them this as an interactive 3D model on their phone. They can just walk around. They can look around and see it as if it's built already. So that's very beneficial. And at the same time, they also now just say, like, yeah, but I can't see myself sitting there with no back. So can you make this also into a more enclosed space while still maintaining the openness towards the kitchen? So it's all these kinds of new kind of elements that I'm now finding myself struggling with, kind of refining this project as well. But actually, that's the thing that I'm most interested and most passionate about, is really that yeah, as I say, you know, work in progress. I'm far more interested in that period than the actual built result or the finished result. You know, it's really this. And one of those works in progress is this is from our last study trip, Daniel. This group of students, Daniel invited all of us into his house to have dinner. So I thought he's not aware that I'm bringing 25 students, but yeah, it was all fine. And now they're working on like what you can see here, like casting concrete models of stuff that they've been researching. And then at the same time in my work, I showed you like these private houses. I'm also working on some bigger projects as well, where they're casting concrete, but then on a slightly bigger scale. But at the same time, yeah, what you're seeing, I think in a couple of seconds here on the top right, is also doing these kinds of excursions and interviews and things like that. And then on the bottom right, and this is the one I think I'm gonna almost end with, as really being a work in progress over here. This is, I think, also maybe I'll do another lecture about this sometime. A project that I'm now doing in Antwerp, actually for a colleague of mine, Sergio Figueiredo, who's also he's an assistant professor at our university for architectural theory and history. And he's asked me actually to design their house, which is, they bought already an existing house. But what we're doing here is more kind of, yeah, I called it excavating the house. So it's not building, almost not building anything, but just taking stuff away and just making space. And it's really that making space, giving light to the interior, opening up view lines, that I think is also present in the house that I showed before, so the one in Zeist, but definitely also here, and which creates this kind of very rich spatial atmosphere for people to really, well, feel at home in. So this is something that I aim for in projects like this, but also another work in progress, like these bigger projects where I find like it being a bit more difficult to connect personally, because these are for project developers. So there's a lot of people going to be living in there that I have never seen or spoken to. So it kind of requires a bit of different mindset for me to also be able to kind of emotionally connect to what's necessary there. But I'm having a really great time also designing these kinds of things as well. So yeah, that brings me to my conclusion of the lecture, actually, where I find myself enjoying these kinds of works in progress and the way that everything kind of links together. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan, for the inspiring talk. What I really always find amazing is how you are able to connect the digital world to thinking, and you are extremely hands-on with models, with your work on the building side. And the question a little bit is, how much are you still able to interact in the building site itself? A little bit how you work, it calls, it's like the old way of designing. Until it isn't finished, you still can change your drawing. And how is it in your world and in your way today? It's going to be less and less possible to change anything if you see something on the building site. And still, until one could do so much or change so much if one sees a better solution or the client sees a better solution.
Yeah, the funny thing is that actually, though I love being on the construction site, hardly anything really changes during that period. And I think it has to do actually with my work method of actually building everything already in 3D. And of course, reality is completely different from the virtual model. And that's the thing that where I learned the most of visiting a construction site, is that what I draw in my 3D model is really down to the millimeter or the tenth of a millimeter, you know. And on the construction site, you have tolerances that sometimes vary from 5 millimeters minimum, you know, to sometimes 3-4 centimeters. Yeah, which you have to take into account. And that's something that took me also a couple of failures, you know, seeing these things on the construction site and then seeing, oh man, I should have thought about that. So basically, for every project, there is something that goes wrong still. And then I learn from it and try not to make those kinds of mistakes next time. But I know that while I'm drawing, I'm never drawing lines, but I'm drawing walls and window frames and hardly ever fills or anything. So that's what I actually really like about building with these kinds of BIM models, that I'm seeing myself really as, yeah, the carpenter putting it together, and then I'm thinking, oh, but is this really going to work? And would I build it like this as well? That's also where it comes in handy sometimes doing something myself. So on my own house, I did a lot just trial and error and start hammering stuff together, and that's also when you get to know, like, okay, so it's that difficult, you know. And yeah, so but there's already so much thinking in it before we get to the construction site, that all of the changes are really in that period, and then after that hardly any changes are made anymore.
Not just big masters like Scarpa, Terrani, and all these people, they were still designing until the end. Of course, we are not a period, we are in another construction, another way of constructing, so it's a bit more difficult, especially when you do these pre-constructed things, that when you produce something in Austria, deliver it to the Netherlands, then your drawings need to fit before
Yeah,
you mount the building in the
exactly that.
Netherlands. You have no
And
chance to
also,
do anything
yeah,
else.
yeah, and also because I'm so I feel so responsible also for the budget. I know that once I start changing something during construction, it's always going to cost twice or 3 times as much as it would normally cost. And
Mm.
so often that's just not an option. So you need to have it all worked out before. But I'm also intrigued by, yeah, for instance, Sigurd Leeuwenens, you know, we would always go around also late at night at the construction site and then start changing his plans. And the next time people had to tear down a brick wall and rebuild it. Yeah, nice to
Exactly.
do something like that. But I try to always, just by working together with the craftsmen on site, and also in a very early stage already involving the contractor in my plans. I try to have those kinds of discussions and learn from them before the mistakes are made. Yeah,
And another question is a little bit, these buildings you showed us, are they mainly pre-produced? Is there a prefabrication, a huge amount of prefabrication in it, or is it often normal constructed on site? Or it's a bit the question of how the building industry even works.
yeah,
Here it's different than in your country, it's different than, let's say, in Germany already. It has always these local possibilities which are relevant for the costs at
yeah,
the end.
exactly.
You need to
Yeah,
deal with it
yeah,
or take
yeah.
them in
So
account.
yeah. Yeah, the strange thing is that, for instance, that house in CLT, that was, of course, yeah, the rough construction was completely prefab in Austria. But that means, or at least in Holland, a lot of contractors are really afraid of something like that. So they're very hesitant to do something like it, and that means that they also put margins on top of it. In this case, we were happy to find a contractor who was already specialized in this kind of ecological way of building and was doing a lot of prefabricated timber construction just in their own workshop. And they were also able to put together that CLT house themselves. And that meant that everything was really like a small team, and they were in control of all of the possible hazards in terms of budget as well. But for the house that I showed most extensively, so the one with all the different options, the first one in Veldhoven, that was a really traditional kind of build, and that actually the way that I first designed that house was really based on CLT, because I'm so interested in this kind of way of constructing also because it's very intuitive. It's really, as I said, like building a model, and you can very easily understand the physics behind it and the structural systems. So I think, or I know that was the way that I designed it. Then just before we started looking for a contractor for it, was when the COVID thing hit us. So then all of a sudden everything changed, and the client really said, yeah, but I don't want to be dependent on some kind of factory in Austria, which might go into lockdown, and then I have to wait for my house for God knows how long, you know? And so he said, no, yeah, as much as I like your idea about CLT and that kind of construction method, that's a risk that I'm not willing to take. So we found a contractor that was saying like, okay, but I can also build this in a more traditional kind of way. And that gave them more security. And in the end, I must admit that also it paid out, because right at the point where we started, where my client needed to sign the invoices and the invoices of the contractor, that was when also the prices for timber started skyrocketing here. So it was in 1 month that price for timber raised by about 30%. So that would have meant that if we had designed that house completely out of CLT, but all of a sudden we were 30% over budget from 1 month to the other, and that would have killed the project. So in the end, it paid out, but it was a bit of a downfall in terms of.
What is very interesting when you see your projects. I remember when I went always to the Netherlands, of course, we from Switzerland, we went to see Rem Koolhaas. Then you have all these kind of fuzzy details, which are not centimeters, more 10 centimeters away from each other. The Dutch way of construction. And when I see your work, it's completely something different. It has nothing to do with this, what we learned, what Ron Koolhaas was teaching or doing, not this industrial way of production. It's a completely different approach. Where does this come from? Is it because you are more interested in this Belgian way, or is it much more of your own interest that you try to be site specific and take responsibility, and you love to deal with the people which are there? Because otherwise it's always a bit somewhere, something. It's not this hands-on way of dealing, which are you doing. It's two different worlds. How do you see this?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of those two, actually. So the fact that I'm interested in the making and the way that how things come together, I think that really comes also from the teaching that I had, for instance, with the professor that I graduated with, Jan Westra, who also became my boss when I started teaching at university, and who in the end also asked me to design an extension to his house, which was really nerve-wracking to do that for my sort of mentor. And but that was really about thinking very carefully about how things come together and how things are made. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why I find myself so much drawn to also Swiss architects, but particularly also the Flemish ones, so the Belgian, is that there's much more of that kind of delicate approach also to architecture and to the location and to finding a proper response to also the very modest kind of challenges, you know, like that's something that I really appreciate in Flemish architecture from the last decade. Is really there's no assignment too small to really pay proper attention to, and that's something that I sometimes find a bit off-putting in Dutch architecture, is that everyone tries to be funny and sometimes treat it as a big joke or something. But if you build the joke and have to listen to the same joke for the next 30 years, it starts to become boring very, very fast. So yeah, I actually like that approach much more in finding the kind of special things in the ordinary, and that's something that the Belgians are really masters of.
And another thing about site specific, last year we had a talk on about French architecture around Grenoble, which was interesting in the terms that concrete architecture was a big deal there, a very big deal. Everything was in, they had a huge, let's say, technology and knowledge, and the officers knew how to work with it. And now we have all these ecological discussions, and there's a political push towards wood. Everything needs to be wood. The competitions, every building is possibly wood and no concrete anymore, which means to get poor designs. And the wood is, of course, not from there because they're missing the really the infrastructure of cutting, drying, and then doing it. And the wood is coming from Russia. So these are these absurdities you have in this modern, this contemporary movement, ecological movement. Isn't that as well a problem in your case, because you are in the Netherlands? There is not much wood industry, I would say. There's a brick industry, there are other industries, and you are producing as well your houses in Austria. That's not, isn't it, that's not really an ecological argument to do this. It's much more, it's a different argument. Or does it need to be? Doesn't it need to be? Because you pointed it out a little bit.
Yeah. So I think the ecological argument is a very valid argument for me to also do more in timber, even here in the Netherlands, and you can see it also as a trend. So there are also a lot of people just doing it because it's it sells. I try to be sensible about it, but also nuanced. So the thing that, and I think that's also something, again, that I have to admit that I learned from Swiss architect as well, like Roger Boltzhauser, about thinking about hybrid construction, you know, where very cleverly thinking about not the kind of eco-fundamentalism that you might find where you just have like tunnel vision and you say, okay, but everything needs to be timber, or what I see in the Netherlands up until a couple of years ago at least, like just put as much technical installation in there as your budget can afford, Doesn't matter whether everything comes from very polluting factories somewhere in Asia or something. Just put everything in there, which raises your BREEAM certificate, and then it's a good building, you know. If you can do it in a more low-tech way and making use of concrete where it's most suitable, you know, and then making use of timber where that's really applicable and makes sense, and don't use too much of it, and try to think about possible ways of reusing it as well, then I think it can be far more interesting and far more sensible. Maybe not as sexy, but yeah, definitely more challenging and more rewarding for me. And that's also one of the things that I with the group of students that we visited Zurich with. One of them is working on, or one group of them is working on really research into hybrid construction, and that how that can inform your architecture, how you can take inspiration as an architect from thinking about these kinds of, yeah, the load-bearing structure really as a hybrid, together, yeah, either concrete and timber or steel or something like that. And I think there's, for me, a lot of, yeah, inspiration from that, but also a lot of, yeah, just technical and financial possibilities also.
You are as well. Your buildings are very much into kind of research as well. It's not the average thing you design, you develop. These are you're pushing the limits. In design, you always work with a lot of people you already know, either they were students, you know them, you're very well connected. How is it with the people constructing the house? You always have the same constructors or technical stuff or people, or is it very much, it depends very much where are these projects, but most of your projects are, I think, around Eindhoven, more or less, and I understood it well.
No, well, actually my projects are now quite far spread. So a lot of them indeed are close to Eindhoven, but then, yeah, also some houses, as I showed, in Amsterdam, Zeist, which is actually, and Weert, which is then to the south of Eindhoven, quite some distance. So it's quite far spread, and this is also sometimes a bit weird because, as you also found out, I don't even have a website. It's also a work in progress, I guess. But it's also because I'm too stubborn to let anyone else build that website, and I'm too busy to build it myself. And but somehow clients find me through the stuff that I've built, and then so recently I just got called by someone who found the house in Zeist and then contacted the contractor, which he found on the internet, saying like, who was the architect? And then they had to call me saying like, why don't you have a website, and we want to talk to you. And I was thinking, okay, if you do that much trouble, you know, finding me, then we're off to a good start. So it's also starting to become like a sort of selling point to have no website.
I know as well some people that way,
Yeah,
working that way.
but yeah,
No,
so
that's just when you do challenging stuff, you need as well the contractors willing and
oh
being able
yeah,
doing this. That's a bit the trigger point I'm trying to find out, because
yeah.
it's
So I try to so I work with some contractors that I've known for a longer time, but also always new ones. But I try to get in contact with them very early in the process, try to get them involved, and not do a kind of tendering for contractors where they have to just sign up for the contract with a certain fixed price and then we go for the lowest one. No, I always try to convince my clients to go for the contractor that you have the best connection with, and that you trust and that we can make the project with. And most of the times that works out really well. And sometimes it also works the other way around. So because like for instance, there's this one contractor now building extension to a house somewhere in the south of the Netherlands that I designed. And this contractor just recently called me and said, oh, I'm developing this group of houses. I want you as the architect. So I'm asking, like, why do you want me to make that? Yeah, he said, when we started doing the extension to the house that you designed, you called me to say, hey, can we sit together to discuss the details? And that was just well before the start of the project. Let's discuss the details, see if you have anything that you would like to see differently. And he said, you were the first architect to ever do that, to call me and ask for my opinion about your drawings. And he was like, okay, if you work that way, then I want you to design this new project that I'm developing myself. And I thought, okay, yeah, that's how I like to work together with people, take them seriously. And,
Yeah.
and it works
Just
both ways.
Just a simple question. You're often in Switzerland. Why?
Yeah.
You could go anywhere with your students.
Yeah.
You could go to Austria,
True.
you could go, the Dutch is always triggered. The most difficult thing you can go and to stay and all the cost is always Switzerland, but still you think, yeah, you trigger your students to go here to see something. What's the point on it?
Well, I think it all started with also being intrigued by the high quality of, first of all, craftsmanship, but also of detailing and of really the quality of construction. But I must say that after a couple of visits, that also kind of creeped me out a little. So it started to, I'm not sure whether I should say this like this, but at a certain point, I think it was one of the first times that I really visited like Switzerland for a longer time. I did a sort of, I called it a Zoom tour, a tour through, to like several buildings by Peter Zumthor. And at the end of that tour, and I think I saw like 5 or 6 of those buildings, I was really like, oh, but everything is so perfect. It started to kind of freak me out a little. Also because it's something that is so unattainable for Dutch architects ever to build something like that. It's impossible here. So I was thinking like, okay, but it's also scary, And what I now see with also the younger generation kind of emerging is also this, sometimes embracing also imperfections and getting other qualities also into the project, which I find really, really fascinating, and which I also, it's not just Swiss architecture. You mentioned French architects as well, like before. So firms like Studio Muoto, or Brute, or even also Raccaton and Vasal, these kinds of architects, and it's that kind of merging with the Swiss way of thinking and the Belgian one or something, where there's a lot of crazy stuff going on. And I think it also, for me personally, it has to do a lot with Peter Merkley, which I find really like one of the most enigmatic but also incomprehensible architects I've ever seen. So it's I find his work so much more fascinating than beautiful. So it's not just that it's some of the things I'm really like, what's he doing here? But it seems like he's sort of reinventing himself with each project, and then each book that I buy of him, there's again something in there which I'm thinking, huh, this is, I don't understand it, and what is he doing here? And I find that very remarkable and intriguing. Yeah, to keep growing, to keep yeah, exploring, and yeah, I'm a big fan. Yeah.
I think that's the most important thing in your practice and as well in your teaching. Knowledge hasn't finished. Exploring
Yeah.
hasn't finished. It's always
Yeah.
the pleasure of let's go deeper, let's go further, let's go another step. Is it possible? Let's do it. Why? How? And I think what I really appreciate on all the students' work I visited when I was in Eindhoven, and on your presentation, on your way of thinking, is this passion of exploring and continuing. It's not that architecture is finished, it's done. We even, when I remember the discussions we had in Eindhoven when I was for this master finals, were complete. I think they were completely different discussions than we would have today, because topics have shifted. All this ecological thing coming in shifted the question, let's say, of beauty. We had their projects about from Zumthor, from other people. They were now shifting in a shifting process to different themes, which is super interesting. And I think it's super interesting that you try to not to give a recipe. Let's do it that way, or that's the knowledge we have. It's much more that you try to give tools to be able to explore the world and the things of architecture, the concepts of architecture, to be in the time. And this is super interesting. No?
Nice. Yeah.
Any questions from the students?
I think everyone is really looking forward to having a beer or something.
Probably, yes.
I know I am.
If there are no questions, thank you, Jan Schevers, for the lecture and the
You're
talk
very
and the
welcome.
discussion. I really appreciate it extremely, because I think we could discuss much more about these projects and the way of approaching. And that's why I really like this way as well, talking to you, and as well the passion of exploring things. And I really hope you keep on with this challenging way of seeing the world and exploring architecture, because it will be never finished. And that's the good thing on it. And that's a bit as well why I do this lecture thing, this lecture series, because I think it's important that we don't teach just how we do it. It's as well, we need to open up and show what happens in the world, to understand a little bit our position and the tools we are working with to come up with new solutions, which more appropriate solutions for the task we have today.
Yeah.
This term we have 3 other lectures, no, 2 other lectures. Another one we have is next week is Alberto Venterle. It's an Italian architect from Trento, Paesaggi Construiti. It will be in Italian, and it's as well about he's an architect in Trento, and is working with architecture and competitions and projects there. And as well, he's director of the journal Touris Babel, an architecture journal for South Tyrol. And I think it's about designing and thinking in 2 different ways. And that's extremely inspiring, to move something as you have seen in South Tyrol, there a lot was happening recently, and it doesn't fall from heaven. It's really something we need to create, and a lot of people need to think and push. And that's why, as well, I was asking two other architects, or Predeville architects, from Bruneck, South Tyrol, to show their work, because I think there is very, very good architects from South Tyrol, especially in wood. And that's why I think then the whole thing will be much more a series of a thinking process where to go deeper into the tools and the way architecture works today and what we need today. Yeah. Jan, anything to add?
No, I'm looking forward to these. I'm gonna attend them as well.
I will send you the link.
Yeah,
And
great.
really, thank you very much for the talk, for the time, and the whole preparation for the whole thing. Looking forward to see you again.
It was a pleasure. So definitely see you again.
Great.
Soon. Okay.
See you. Thank you
Bye.
very much. Have a
Thank
nice
you.
evening. Bye-bye, Jan.
Bye.